Good evening and welcome to the Straz Center's Town Hall, Voices of the Community. I'm Fred Johnson, Artist in Residence and Community Engagement Specialist at the Straz Center, along with my co-host Alice Santana, who is the Director of Education and Community Engagement. Thank you so very, very much for joining us this week. We are really, really excited to be here again and having several conversations that are both inspiring and hopefully really help us to more deeply understand, appreciate our community, and move forward together. I want to quickly introduce the members of our panel, and then as we get into the nuts and bolts of the evening, they will more deeply be introduced. First, want to acknowledge Ms. Jerry Kelly, who many of you have seen before. She has been a member of our town hall panel before. She is an amazing educator who retired as a principal from the Hillsborough County Schools. She has also been a consultant to our Patel Conservatory and also has done amazing work at the University of South Florida. So Jerry, welcome. We're happy that you're with us again.
Thank you.
Mr. Fred Hearns, who really made his mark in Tampa Bay over 30 years working for the city of Tampa, certainly impacted and touched many, many, many lives, continued his studies at the University of South Florida. He is one of Tampa Bay's preeminent historians, and he claims Tampa as his home, although he started out from New York City, but that's all right. Fred, we're so happy to have you with us again this evening. Thanks so much for being with us. Miss Andrea Jamosli is with us, artist extraordinaire. She is recognized as a theater and spoken word artist. She's been on tour for the last 4 years. We are really, really fortunate to have her at the Straz Center for the Performing Arts, and she will be sharing with us this evening great information about her upcoming one-woman show that will be performed in our Jape Theater. Andrea, welcome to the Town Hall. And Mr. Justin Gray, entrepreneur, a gentleman who, when you mention his name in Tampa Bay, people smile and people are really excited for you to know him. So Justin, we're really happy that you're here with us this evening. He has done everything from be an advisor for our Best of Tampa Bay to starting his own businesses. He is kind of a master in the culinary and bartending world, and also is really an expert and a devoted voice in terms of the importance of the vote. So Justin will be joining us this evening. Thank you so much for being here as we have an important conversation about the importance of the vote. We start our evening out by honoring a mentor, an icon, a gentleman who has inspired, changed, and transformed people's lives. He was a great educator. He was known as a great athlete. He was known as a great coach. He was known as an inspirational man of God who started an amazing prison ministry. I'm speaking of Reverend Abraham Brown, and both Fred Hearns and Jerry Kelly have an appreciation for and a connection to Reverend Brown. As a matter of fact, a book of memoirs called "It's Your Move" was edited by Fred Hearns, very, very, very much a part of putting that book together and really sharing with people the great riches and the magnificent man that Reverend Abraham Brown was for Tampa Bay and for many, many other folks in other parts of the world. I understand he even met the Queen of England. So, Fred, I turn it over to you to give us an overview of the amazing Reverend Abraham Brown.
Well, thank you, Fred, and good evening to all those watching and listening. And again, greetings to the members of this panel. And I really, again, want to thank the Straz for all you do to keep us informed. As challenging as these times are, the Straz is finding a way to get the job done. And I really want to thank you, Alice, and everyone here for doing that. So, Reverend Abraham Brown, this man lived the life of maybe three of us combined, with all of the accomplishments that he was able to achieve during his 83 years here on this earth. Abe Brown was born in Tampa in 1927. He grew up as all of those folk who were living during that time did, during the days of rampant segregation, where there were actually different pockets of the city that were segregated by law and by custom. And so he grew up in Black neighborhoods, but always having an appreciation for all people, regardless of their background. He worked hard as a young man, attended Middleton High School, got an athletic scholarship, played football at Xavier University in Louisiana, and then later at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, where he is in the Rattlers Hall of Fame, the Athletic Hall of Fame, as a football player. Taught school in Hillsborough County for 38 years. And during most of those years, he also was a football coach. Won a state football championship when he was the coach at Blake High School in 1969. But he really found his calling in the mid-1970s when he was touched by God, Reverend Brown said, to start a prison ministry. He had no guide to do that. He said that the only instructions he had came from the Bible. He just followed the Holy Spirit. And many years later, we began to realize just how important his work was when the Prison Crusade changed its name to Abe Brown Ministries. And Abe never wanted any recognition for himself. And Jerry, I know you'll agree with that. Anytime somebody said, Reverend Brown, we want to put your name on this building or on this program, he always fought against it. But people outvoted him, and several institutions here in this city bear the name of Abraham Brown. And I could just go on and on and on. But as Fred said, last year we were able to publish his memoir, and this is what it's called, and it's Your Move, which is something that Abe often said during the sermons that he preached. For many years, he was pastor at the First Baptist Church of College Hill. Jerry, I know, can go into more detail, and Justin also about that. But Abraham Brown was also known as Tampa's pastor. Mayor Sandy Friedman, during the 1980s, called on him when there was civil unrest in East Tampa in the College Hill public housing area. And Abe Brown organized Pastors on Patrol. And Pastors on Patrol are still going strong today. This is actually the 10th anniversary of Reverend Abraham Brown's passing. He died on September 11th, which is a date we're all familiar with, 10 years ago in September. So as we celebrate his life and his accomplishments, the Federal Post Office on Hillsborough Avenue and 30th is named the Reverend Abraham Brown U.S. Post Office. The stadium at Middleton High School is Abraham Brown Stadium. And I could go on and on and on, but I was so pleased to interview him the last few months of his life. We spent several hours together putting this book together. And Abe Brown, at the age of 83, could remember things that happened when he was 5 years old. I mean, he made my job very easy. And so as I listened and as I recorded his memories, I knew that this book was going to be something special. It took a while to get it out to the public, but we did it. And Abe Brown Ministries does have copies of Abraham's life work. It's Your Move.
Very good. Jerry, your reflections on Reverend Brown?
Well, I happened up at his church, my husband and I, and I tell you, the feeling that you got when you went there, he didn't care whether you had been there for the first time or you had never ever known him. He always made you feel at home and feel like you're a part of his family, which was First Baptist Church family. And that really touched my husband and I, and we joined. And it's been about 22 years now for us. And I tell you, he built without even touching things, because all he did was planted seeds. He knew his members' talents and abilities, and he gave you free reins to do God's work. And that really, his integrity with that was just so amazing that it just really floored me when I went there, because I had done theater out in the city for years. And I changed my venue in terms of what I wanted to do, and that was to do ministry through plays in the church. And he gave me that ability and did not even just say, Jerry, do it. He provided the resources for me to get it done. He was an advocate to whoever, that you are able to touch young people and move God's work and take young people off the streets. He really pushed it, and he really did everything he could to advocate for young people not being on the streets, but doing things like the theater, like music, like dance. We added dance into the church, the drummers, all kinds of things were added that, as you all know, the traditionals didn't want done, but he broke down the walls and got it done, and made sure, because he knew those were the things that were going to get our young people committed to something other than the streets. And I tell you, he was just so amazing. I think what really, really helped me when I began to look at him in terms of writing about him is that he had integrity.
Mm.
And it was such strong integrity that it wore off on you, no matter who you were, what you were about. If you came to our church, we had just as many people in our church from the prison crusade coming out of prison. They would come right in and join in with our church, and you never knew the difference. And I think that was one thing that just really grew the church, the community, and also grew the prison crusade ministry. And that ministry has grown. I really want to commend Robert, because he took him on and just took it to another level. It's just amazing what he did with it. Even when Reverend Brown was living, I want to share a piece, if I may. Um,
Sure.
they got some money to renovate the building, and they hid it from him. He had stepped back and was letting Robert take over, and he would come through. He just let Robert did what he needed to do, and he would ask questions, I understand, about what that room is for. It was a room set aside that the A. Brown Ministry, Robert and his daughter, had began to design and decorate just in his memory, because they wanted him to know, even though he had moved aside and was just the consultant or the mentor, that he was not being dismissed. And they did that office up for him, and he didn't find that out to the night of dedication. And when they took him in there, I wish you all could see his face. It was just amazing. But that's how much he was loved. He was loved, truly.
We talk a lot about the fact that the quality of leadership um, uh, today, and in many instances for our communities, that there's not that you can't point to those strong specific leaders. And I hope that that's ever evolving and ever changing. The interesting thing about Reverend Brown is that he was both a minister who had a prison ministry. He was also an educator and an administrator, and he was also someone that leaders in the community, that the mayor, was really attracted to him, and as a coach, he inspired so many. What do you think? What enabled him to bridge those gaps? What were the qualities that really enabled him to bridge those gaps?
I,
You know,
I
I'm sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Jerry.
I thought it was his honesty,
Mm,
his sincerity, and his honesty. He was not false. He was real. I
mhm,
mean, very real, down to earth. I mean, it wasn't anything for him to be out on the basketball court with the boys, or to be sitting with a bunch of us in the sanctuary of our church talking about our city and where it's going. He was honest. He was very sincere in what he did. He was nothing phony about Reverend Brown. I think that was one thing that made him a strong leader, because you knew you could go to him. Now, I have to admit, you might ask a question that you may not get the answer you want, but you're going to get the truth and you're going to get honesty. And that's what I loved about him.
Yeah. Fred, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, the latter part of his life, I'd say the last 40 years of his life, he will tell you that what drove him was obedience. Yes. He was obedient to the Holy Spirit. He said that every time I spoke with him, that came up in the conversation. The first 40 years of his life, when he was a student and an educator and a coach, he was just driven. He was just so passionate about whatever he did. And, you know, Reverend Brown had red hair. People who didn't know him when he was young may not have known that. But, you know, it was unusual to see African-American men with red hair. He had naturally red hair. And people said that that went with his fiery spirit. Because those boys who played football under Abe Brown, especially at Middleton High School, he coached there for 13 years. They were terrified if they missed an assignment and they had to come back to the sideline and face Abe Brown. They knew they were going to be running extra laps the next day at practice, and he was going to get up in their face. But he was just so committed to whatever he was doing. But he did it all in love. And the one thing that he said that really turned him around and made him as committed as he was to the Holy Spirit and doing God's work, he realized that he had spent all those years teaching young men how to be athletes, how to play football. And he said the Holy Spirit spoke to him one day and said, now I want you to teach them how to be men. And that's when he began going to the jails and visiting these young men. And he had no idea how he didn't think he was going to build a ministry, but he was just being obedient. So obedience was what really drove him. And we're so grateful that he came our way, that he was here in Tampa, Florida, for us to claim him as our own. And he loved everybody.
Beautiful, beautiful. Justin, you have a remembrance of Reverend Brown?
I think to Fred's point, and actually even to Miss Kelly's point as well, I think every encounter with him was 100% authentic. And I think his authenticity translated very well to anyone who came into contact with him. For me personally, I think I became a member at his church after having my mother and I relocated, and we found our way to First Baptist. I was fortunate enough to do pretty well in high school. The church that I attended would often provide scholarships for the students after graduating high school before moving into college. And just even the way in which he spoke to the students, the way in which he conveyed just kind of their value. I think if you didn't have a sense of purpose about yourself before, you would walk away from that conversation with one. And that's definitely one of the most vivid things that I recount. Probably also just because of my old age, just one of the more recent things as well. But yeah, definitely one of my fondest memories of him as a man, and I think a great representation of him as a man and his legacy as well.
That's great. You know, there's a lot of talk and conversation about content of character. First of all, I recommend the book, It's Your Move. It's a really, really great book. You really get an authentic, warm, human feel. So great work, Mr. Hearns, in terms of really collecting these memoirs. In the growth, development, struggle, and continued pathway of our community, many of our leaders of faith have truly been leaders for us because of the connection that they made. So whatever your faith tradition is, to recognize that Reverend Brown's faith and his dedication to being of service and to following that guidance, that spiritual guidance, obviously is foundationally really important. And so we are honored to be able to recognize his amazing contribution, the leader that he was, the man that he was. Early on in the book, it talks about when the hard work that he did as a young man, as a small boy, the work that he did, his dedication to getting out there and doing what he needed to do to support his family, and his tenacity and his dedication and his faith. Much of what those who guide us in the right direction have, and that's what inspires us, and that's what guides us to him. So we're here at the Straz are honored to recognize Reverend Abraham Brown as a true mentor and a leader and a great example of humanity that we should all aspire to be. Which moves us into our next segment with Mr. Justin Gray, a person who I said earlier, I can't tell you the number of people that were like, oh man, you've got to meet Justin Gray. He is such an amazing human being. He's a great guy. He's so great at what he does. When you hear him speak, you really feel him. So Justin, I just did a basic overview. I didn't talk about the fact that in 2013 you founded A&A Hospitality, that you've also been a board member, an active member of the United States Bartenders Guild, the Tampa Bay chapter, that for the last 8 years you served as a member of the producers group at the Straz Center and helped to really organize and support some of our biggest events, and that you that in 2015 you joined Kilgore LLC as the COO of the luxury apparel company. So you yourself, an entrepreneur, a businessman, and also someone who is a real visionary and a real voice for the importance of each of us having and utilizing our voice. And so we want to have a conversation about voting. We're about to move into a voting cycle, not a conversation about who to vote for, but a conversation about why the vote is important. We know in our honoring John Lewis and our honoring Reverend Lafayette that many people made sacrifices and worked hard so that we could have the right to vote. So I'm going to ask you a question that folks might say we should all know logically the answer, but why is the vote so important?
I think the immediate thought is to kind of rely on the implied logic of voting is kind of a civic duty. And I think that's kind of where the conversation ends for most people. If that's where the conversation ends for you, as long as you're still participating, that's what matters. To answer your question, for me personally, when I think about it just more thoroughly, for me, voting represents awareness, awareness on behalf of the populace, of the people, of us. You alluded to, the struggles that we, as minorities, whether it be female or African Americans, the work that has been done for us to get the right to vote. A lot of that work included dealing with voting intimidation, dealing with voting tampering. And so I don't want to undermine the fact that there are still real concerns about if our votes are being handled correctly or responsibly or honestly. I can't undermine that. That is a real concern for people. However, what I will say is that the more visible that we make ourselves, the more that we show up, I think that's when we start to demonstrate that we are paying attention, that even if things are being mishandled or misappropriated, there will be accountability. If there is voter apathy, then things that happen that are, less than desirable things, I think they're able to pass undetected. Whereas if individuals are showing up and voting en masse, then even if we feel any concern about things being misappropriated, I think it's a collective voice from the populace to the leadership that hey, we will not be mishandled. We are paying attention. We are alert. We are observant. And so for me, that's what voting represents. In doing that, I think it helps make everyone more accountable. And I think that's really important right now. So I think for me, kind of that's the paramount reason why we need to vote, is just to demonstrate that, hey, we're watching, that we're paying attention, and that, hey, we expect our leadership to represent our best interests accurately.
Some of the experiences that I've had, and I think Alice has had as well in the past couple of months when we're out in the community and really connecting to the community, is that there are some folk who have a feeling, and I think there's a lot of what we don't clearly understand or that we may not clearly know. There's conversation around the fact that because in our past election, there was this feeling that although there was a popular vote that was won, that the Electoral College was the real determiner. And so people don't fully understand that. And in the last month or so, I've heard people say, well, I don't, does my vote really matter? I mean, isn't it determined by somebody else? What do you say to people who are kind of in that place of not really understanding whether or not their vote counts?
I mean, to be honest, that's specifically what I was just speaking to. I think that I'd like to honor I'd like to honor the hope that there is still some integrity within the system. And so with that being said, I think that there's still the number of people that aren't showing up to vote are it's really slanting, for want of a better term, our collective voice, our collective ability to be able to say accurately whether or not votes are being handled truly. If that aside, if there is any hint of just mishandling or misdoing, at that point, our voting matters even more. As collectively we show up to the polls and we, as I alluded to earlier, demonstrate that we are here because we are watching. I think that accountability is what removes any opportunity for any misdealing. So whereas that is specifically what I was speaking to in terms of, I mean, a lot of people are afraid that even if I do vote, it's not going to be counted or it doesn't matter. I think choosing not to vote is a way of saying to our leadership that that's okay, that we aren't even paying attention and that we don't, we aren't going to hold you all accountable. So in the midst of those very discouraging actions, I think it's more important. I think it's more important that we mobilize, that we activate ourselves, that we show up to the polls en masse. And then once we've shown up to the polls en masse, I think that strengthens or amplifies our voice or the conversation about whether or not we really are represented when we show up to the polls and count.
Yeah, very good.
And vote, forgive me.
Very, very important for everybody to vote. I'd like to, just from a historical standpoint of view, and again, one of the things that I'm happy that we're able to do is sort of share other textures of growing up in Tampa Bay. Fred or Jerry, do you remember a time where there was contention and where it was difficult, especially for folks from the Black and Brown community, to be able to have the opportunity to vote? Or is that an experience that a parent or a loved one had? Fred?
Well, in 1910, Tampa organized the White Municipal Party. That's what it was called, the White Municipal Party. So if you were not a white person, you could not even vote in the primary elections in the city of Tampa for any office. That system was in place from 1910 until 1947. I was born in 1948, so 1 year after before I was born, my mother, my father, their brothers and sisters and everybody they knew could not vote in municipal elections. I mean, if you can believe that. So I don't remember a time when my vote didn't count, but I just missed it because my parents and all those before them lived in that time. And so by 1947, we were at such a disadvantage as far as economics were concerned, healthcare, education, you name it, any category of life that you want to name, we have been put at such a disadvantage. We're still trying to catch up.
Mm. Jerry?
I didn't grow up in Tampa, but I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, and I heard the stories growing up. My grandfather was a sharecropper, and he did not get the chance to vote until he was close to 89 years old. And he did so many things for Tallahassee that you would think that he would have been privileged with the ability to vote. He was the one that actually took a horse and plow and plowed the road going into Tallahassee. Now I'm giving you history.
Wow.
And that road was a dirt road for years and years and years. But he is the one that actually did the first plowing of that road. And every so often they would get him to do the road again to level it off. And so I know that he resented the fact that he was not able to vote. But he wasn't. He was not able to vote. And I can remember at 89 years old, him going to vote. He felt like it was something so great when there were so many other young people who were voting, thought it was nothing to it. We're voting. But he didn't see it that way. And I know and understand now why he felt that way, because he had done so much and yet he was thought of so little.
Yes.
I want to be respectful of the time here, but I think both of those stories demonstrate precisely what I was trying to say. During 1910, in the white municipal party, when blacks were not allowed to vote, when we weren't allowed to vote, that's the time to take to the polls. I mean, that's how we went from not having voting rights to having voting rights. It was sit-ins, boycotts, marches, but it was us making ourselves heard. It was us making ourselves visible. It was us saying we will not be ignored. So, and the same with the story that Ms. Kelly just told. When we had the absence of rights, being quiet is not what acquired those rights. When we were denied rights, fighting against that is actually where the acquisition of the rights come from. So when things aren't going well, that's not the time to be quiet. That's the time to make the most noise. So right now, I think, and that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier. That's why it's so important that we show up to the polls. It's our way of saying, even if you aren't counting us, we are counting. And we're going to hold you accountable. And we're going to make demands for the right to vote, or more accurate or fair voting systems, or a more honest process. But that won't happen if apathy continues to prevail. So I think that I didn't want to take over the conversation, but those 2 points about us not having the opportunity to vote, I think examining those scenarios will kind of demonstrate why right now being active and being vocal is so important.
Absolutely. I was listening to a panel a couple of days ago of 9 women who were running for various positions, and the same message was articulated, that the struggle for women to gain the vote, and the folks who made those sacrifices, that is the foundation upon which we build and recognize that, yes, it's a civic responsibility, but it is really an opportunity to be able to participate. So everyone who is of age should exercise their right and their power in their individual vote. So it's a very, very important thing. Thank you, Justin. Thanks so much.
Can I say one thing though, before we do move on from this topic?
Sure.
It's not just about the vote, but it's also familiarizing yourself with the ballot. You're not just voting on the presidency, you're also voting on different amendments that affect the entire county, the state, the nation. And that's something that, being first generation Hispanic in the US, my grandmothers taught me. They didn't know English, so I learned from a very young age to help them translate their ballots and would sit there and research together, okay, which is the right way to vote on these additional amendments, because every single one of those things affect so many other people. And for them, it was very important to make sure they still voted because, as you know, Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. We don't get to vote on the island in the national election, even though the United States has a say in how we are run. But if you are on US soil, you can vote. So I just wanted to make that also known.
Very important.
That's
Very
really, really important. Thank you so much. And, absolutely, Alice. And I know that, again, that's another conversation that's been had about not just focusing on the top votes, but all of the other infrastructure that is really, really such an important part of manifesting change and really moving forward. Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you. Really happy now to have a conversation as an arts institution. And an arts institution that is happy to be a container for conversations that are so important. Our artists are incredibly important. And it's really great, Andreja, to have you with us on this panel and to be kind of our artist, a profiled artist for this town hall. We are excited for a lot of reasons. Number one, because again, your gift precedes you. I mean, again, when people talk about Andreja Mosley, they're like, look, you got to see what Andreja Mosley does. So we know that you are in about to present a one-woman show. Will you tell us about this production that you're going to be doing here at the Strauss Center?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you to the Strauss and everyone on the panel. It's been a enthralling discussion, and I'm very honored to be a part of this evening. The show that is happening at the Strauss Center in the Jade Theater is Twilight by Andrea Smith. And it's Twilight Los Angeles 1992. And the show is based around all of the characters and events that occurred in the Rodney King beating. So it's coming from the monologues of everyone involved, the officers, the Korean stores, Rodney King, his family, the police department, the attorneys, side people that were just bystanders but became victims. And the uprising that happened in the 90s that unfortunately so accurately reflect the uprising that is now happening in 2020. So the show is taking place in November. The 11th and the 17th, the 18th will be the first week run of the show in the Jade Theater, and tickets are available online. But that's the premise. So it's around the Los Angeles riots in 1992.
Great. So I have two questions for you. Number one, how did Andreja become an artist? How is it that you found your way to the theater?
It's a great question. I was born in New York, but I was raised in Polk County, Florida. So I actually, when I was 16, as a high school student, actually I was 15 in the 10th grade, and I was able to become a student at Harrison School of the Arts in Lakeland, which most of us are familiar with. So I was, one of the only Black students at that time in Harrison as a theater major, and I think the love kind of developed from there, specifically in theater. But in a further background, before I got to Harrison, I'm a church kid. And so we also were on that brink where dance was coming into church and more musicals and those kind of things were coming into church. So that trajectory basically put me into Harrison, and then on we went. It became a lifetime thing.
That's beautiful. Second question, it's difficult for me when I'm sitting around and just talking and communicating, and I find myself talking to myself. So I can't imagine doing a play where you have to flip from character to character to character. So what is that experience like? I mean, most of us have a sense in our mind of an ensemble that works, but one individual who floats from character to character, share some of how do you do that?
That's a good question. I may be crazy. Maybe I dream that. Maybe I'm a little nutty.
No, that's what we call talent. No,
yeah, all right, talent, nuts. No, really, Twilight is essentially, and we have a kind of a abridged version because it would take all day to get all of the characters in that show together.
Yeah.
But I literally am looking at 30 different characters. I'm looking at different genders, and then I'm also looking at different ethnicities and nationalities and things like that. So, and the caveat is about 60 pages of just words and people. So the way in which I really manage it, initially in starting to get the work together, I really base it on personality types. So it's a lot of words, but I see each character, they have a way that they move and a way that they speak that may help me remember what they say. Essentially, who they are is how they move. So when I'm putting together that initial getting involved with all of the characters, they physically feel like something to me. You know what I mean? And then we develop what they actually do and say and where they are.
So it's mind and muscle memory.
It is.
Oh, that's great. In doing this work specifically, is there something that you take away from this piece? Is there something that you learned or that you more deeply understand about what happened with Rodney King, or even more importantly, just kind of moving through this myriad of characters? Is there an experience, or is there something that you take away from this that you know more about before actually delving into the piece itself?
I think initially I didn't want to be triggered or traumatized by the piece. It is so now, normally when I do a work, this is not necessarily a period piece, but it's a period piece prior to now.
Yeah.
The separation between me and the work. The work isn't actually working right now. Time and space, with it being in the 1992 with the riots happening, is so present day for me. The initial thing I thought is, my God, don't let me get traumatized and triggered by this, because I'm living that now. I think as far as like a takeaway, the thing that I take away is there are a multiplicity of sides to the story. This is one of the beauties about the work, is that it doesn't just focus on victim. And it doesn't just focus on the cops, and it doesn't just focus on the lawyers, and it does, it's everybody's perspective. And I think in trying to find a unity in the world, everyone's perspective is true for them, and the inability to understand everyone's perspective makes solving the problem extremely difficult. So the show doesn't solve itself, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
But it introduces that everybody thought they were right for whatever reason.
And I think, that's got to be a truism right now, every day, from people's own individual perspective. Their sense of their rightness is what they cling to. And so the bridge building is really a byproduct of, first of all, having the opportunity to hear and understand where someone is coming from, and then a willingness to build some bridges, because you're right, you kind of set in, you are about the byproduct of what you understand from where you come from. So powerful. I mean, Well, let me ask you this, and I'll put this out for everybody that's on this panel because each of you, in your own way, are involved in the arts. If it's in alignment, I mean, Jerry Kelly, I know that your degree in theater and speech pathology, and Andrasia, your work as an artist. Fred, your work as a historian, and you're an amazing teller of story. And Justin, again, your understanding of working in alignment with performing art. Why, or if, let me say, do you feel that creativity and artistic expression is an important part in building this realm of understanding? As we delve into these challenges that have been here for a long time, are really finitely here like they were in 1992? Is there a role? Because a number of people have asked this question of us as an institution. Is there a role that art and the artist can play in gaining, transformation or change or transcending?
If I may start this off, one of the people that inspire me the most is Nina Simone. So I got to get the old souls inside the soul. There's a lot of people in here. But one of the statements that she makes that has changed how I do art, or why I do art, it's that it's to reflect the times. The responsibility becomes different when it's not simply based on entertaining. Which for me is what makes Twilight so appropriate for me to be doing right now, right? So I think that, do we have a role in all of it? Yeah, that's the role is reflection. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, the phrase that they always life imitates art, or art imitates life. Well, in this instance, it's not always going to imitate just the beautiful parts of life. We're reflecting the good, the bad, the ugly. And the role that the arts gets to play in this is that we get to shed a light on that. And then we can be the catalyst for that conversation.
Jerry, what's the impact that you've seen? I mean, you've put together a lot of plays, directed a lot of plays. Is it important?
It is extremely important. I probably was one of the only principals in Hillsborough County that fought to keep art in my school. And I don't mean just the visual arts. I mean art in every respect, because our children need to be able to show their talents in different ways. And we need to teach young people that they have different talents other than just learning math, science, and arithmetic. We need to let them know that they have creative talents that came natural to them. And so they need to experiment so they can decide where that is and where it's going for them. One of the things that I notice very strongly about our young Black children is that when they're involved in the art, they excel academically. I mean, that is a given, and I know it's a given. And so to fight for it is to make sure they don't lose that. And unfortunately, testing has become the #1 thing, and the arts and physical education has taken a back seat. And that is very sad, because it needs to be there for the children to be able to show their talents and exemplify those feelings that are inside of them. If it's no more than letting out some of that anger, because once they let it out, they're able to deal with life itself, and they're not dealing with it as long as they're holding it in. And so when we give them the arts, they can take on different roles in different situations where they can let out that anger and let out all those feelings. I would not ever say that the arts is not important. It's one of the most important things that we can give young people and old people as well. I encourage it, even in our home, nursing homes and places for the elderly. Let them get the arts, because that's a way of expressing themselves.
Yeah, we certainly understand that and try to exemplify that in the outreach and and work that we do with our partners and at the Patel Conservatory, and the other thing about creative expression, about the theater, it's a beautiful commonplace where people can come together and see inside of the mind and heart of others that they really don't know. We had really great experiences just as a sort of a precursor to the establishment of the Patel Conservatory, where we would do these productions with several hundred children from and their parents from neighborhoods all over Tampa Bay. It first started out just being involved with public housing, and then once we were able to establish that, we opened it up so that other members of the community could come together and could have a common purpose for creating the beauty of being an ensemble, of learning how to be with each other, of learning how to communicate a common message. And some of those friendships still exist now. And some of those folks were 8, 9 years old, and now they're like best friends. So absolutely, when we're able to convene again in public places, and I hope you will convene in November and see Andreja as she does her amazing performance. I hope that you will convene and vote. Thank you, Justin Gray, for really sharing that insight. It's so very important. Thank you, Fred Hearns and Jerry Kelly, for helping us to more deeply understand the importance of Reverend Abraham Brown. And thank you, Alice Santana, for helping to put all this together and give us the insight and the support that we need so that we as an institution can really continue and in some instances really be able to foster conversations that have not been heard before. Thank you very much to our interpreters that help to really more broadly communicate to everybody. Okay, so we're gonna honor and try to end just a little bit before 9 o'clock. We've been asked to do that because we know that there's a big debate going on, and we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to do that. But again, Fred Hearns, Jerry Kelly, Andre Jamosli, Justin Gray, Alice Santana, and all of you out there, thank you so very, very much for allowing us to be a part of transformation and change, allowing us to create a forum so that we can come together and learn more about who we are, learn more about how to come closer together, learn more about the contributions that we all can make as a byproduct of the richness that we're committed to here in Tampa Bay, of really making sure that everybody is included, that we have a diverse and celebrated community, that there's equity, that there's honesty, Jerry, that there's commitment, and that we can really, really move forward together. I'm Fred Johnson. Thank you so very, very much. We'll see you again next month in November. What's the date, Alice? Do we remember?
Next month, it'll be November 19th instead of Thanksgiving Day.
That's right.
So
November 19th. So be there with us. Stay safe, stay strong. Don't forget to wear your mask. Don't forget that distancing thing, but love somebody. Take care. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.